today's show, we'll be hearing from We Matter Party candidate Hughie Rose, who's running for the borough of Enfield, specifically the Southbury ward, on the 6th of May next week. So we'll be hearing from him today about transformational policies that will affect the elderly, young people, and address the health disparities within the borough, and what he plans to do to bring this about. We as ADPAC back independent parties and independent candidates because they're not encumbered by political bylaws that will preclude us from being included in the process. Our mandate is to create structural inclusion, and through the We Matter Party and independent candidates, we fully understand that not only can we do this, but we can then further enable the people through hearing from these candidates to get them in place and represent your interests. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Code Show. And I think that is my brother, Hughie Rose, calling in because I know he's a little late. Bear with me. Is not Hughie, so unfortunately they are going to have to hold the cold for 30 seconds. Okay, so we are getting ready for the weekend, and it has been a tumultuous period for us over the last year and a half, and hearing from our brother Gwendon Slowly on Wednesday was very refreshing for me to be assured that we know we have candidates that are going to represent our interests. What we covered on the show is that we've been here for 70 years en masse, and it doesn't matter how many councillors that we have within other mainstream parties, their hands are cuffed by and large in terms of serving us. So unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many of them get into position, it doesn't mean that we are going to realize any more structural inclusion that we have today. So when we talk about structural inequality, this is something where a policy of benign neglect that looks at African Caribbean problems and challenges, recognizes them and says they will fix themselves. There'll be no policy put in place, there'll be no resources allocated, and through the optics of speaking, taking pictures and shaking hands, giving individual successes, the people will always hold out hope. Well, this hope came to an end when we saw the policy of benign neglect for our brothers and sisters in the US play out. So you had parties like Ice Cube and a number of intellectuals who included social scientists and economists drew out a contract called the Contract for Black America, which was to represent the interests of some 40 million plus population in the United States, who were the descendants of enslaved Africans. So there have been structural inequalities for that population since they were brought in chains to the United States. Now, due to the growth of the civil rights movement throughout the 60s and 70s, it was decided in 1969 under the Nixon administration that they would employ a policy of benign neglect, which was introduced by Nixon's advisor Moynihan. What that policy was all about was silencing the deeply embarrassing rise of the civil rights movement. You know, when you hear a song like Strange Fruit playing globally, everybody knows that we were the strange and rotting fruit hanging from trees. And you can hardly point your finger as a moral authority in the world and have the world's lens gazing at you. So it didn't matter that institutional violence didn't stop from police towards African Americans, that the disparities in terms of education and allocated budgets didn't change, that the mass incarceration of African Americans and the disparities in the justice system remained. They just chose to ignore by not delivering any specific policy. So after the, by and large, black mainstream broadcasters told the population en masse that it was irresponsible to back Ice Cube because he had negotiated with the Trump administration, which was an out and out lie. He had invoted, he had invited through non-partisan contract for Black America, all running candidates to liaise with him. The Democratic Party refused and they said, we'll speak to you after the election, which was very arrogant because they made the assumption that they were going to win. However, based on history, they were well placed to know this. So they ignored it, and some of Donald Trump's delegation met with Ice Cube and this consortia of intellectuals that had put this policy together specifically for the African American population, which is very similar to the aims and objectives of ADPAC, who specifically lobby and campaign on behalf of the almost 3 million UK population of African Caribbeans. In any case, because Ice Cube was demonized by the largely black media and left media, African Americans voted en masse and put the Democrats into place. So when they came, President-elect addressed all of the civil rights leaders. Joe Biden, in that meeting, scolded the civil rights leaders and told them that the Latin American population outnumbered them and that they would have to work with them and figure it out. That was the sum of it. There was nothing in the first 100-day address. And then some 3 months ago, we saw the Asian hate campaign come up. Asian hate is disgusting, and we don't endorse it or find it amusing in any way, in that their human and inalienable rights are just as valuable as everybody else's. Only when it came to creating specific federal legislation to protect Asian Americans, 3 months. Huge backing from the government, huge backing from all of the senators, and that legislation was rushed through within 3 months. Now, George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, Derek Chauvin, who was convicted 2 weeks ago on murder counts. He knelt on George Floyd's body until his life expired for 9 minutes. And the George Floyd bill is yet to pass through the Senate. Joe Biden, as president-elect, could wave that through with one hand. How many of us knew about executive orders before Donald Trump had brought in 7 executive orders in his first 4 days? 7 in his first 4 days. Specifically benefiting groups. Now, when we come to the Joe Biden administration, there has been a heavy reparations movement, and it's all been centered around this HR 40 bill, which is incredibly flawed. So rather than deal with African Americans' historic abuses from the US government, from slavery all the way through redlining, Jim Crow, and the recent spate of police killings, which is only being recorded. It's not that they weren't happening before. And they are lower than they have ever been. No. Indigenous Americans under the Biden administration were awarded $32 billion in specific reparations. That is 32 billion US dollars in specific reparations that they didn't lobby for, they didn't ask for, nor did they campaign for. Now, when Biden was being specifically asked by the pop culture journalists and those who are an intrinsic part of the African American advocacy community, they asked about reparations. And Joe Biden said that you would have to tether your movement, and he wasn't interested in specific reparations unless that meant reparations for everyone, including Native Americans, which is bizarre when you are speaking to African Americans who are some 40 million plus in the population. As a statistic, they represent between 13 and 14% of the population. Why would you be speaking about anybody else unless you had a policy of benign neglect? So it is a policy of benign neglect that we explore, and ADPAC, along with the We Matter Party, seek to circumvent, because we deserve exactly the same as everybody else. We are tax-paying citizens. We are 3 million. We are nearly 4% of the population. And we don't ask for specifics because we are special. We ask for specifics because we are exactly the same. And we know if those specifics aren't laid out, then we'll be ignored through exactly the same policy of benign neglect. So a little later in the show, we'll be speaking with candidate Hughie Rose, who's running for the borough of Enfield and the Southbury ward on the 6th of May, to talk about transformational policy that specifically has a mind to deal with African Caribbean in the borough and bring up our socio-economic mobility, because this is the biggest cause. When we talk about our specifics, they aren't generic, they are very specific. So when we have a program like the Schools to Industry pipeline that collaborates with schools, universities, corporations, councillors, what we seek are resources so that all of those delivery partners are fully resourced in a robust way so we can coordinate their efforts in order to be effective for young people. Now, serious youth violence has been a huge problem for us pre-lockdown. And there was a void where we had a huge opportunity to shift consciousness. Black Lives Matter marched for around 6 weeks without a specific agenda to improve our socio-economic mobility or to stem the youth violence. Now, we do understand that they have their own criteria for operating, but since we can't actually get to speak to any of the leadership directly, it is a very grey area when it comes to delivery specifically for Black. And we ask, what does Black mean? Is this politically Black, which is just self-elected for any non-white heterosexual man? Or is it ethnically Black, which you'd be specifically addressing African Caribbeans? So we always ask for these distinctions because there are a lot of movements that will grow on the backs of African Caribbean advocacy. And then unfortunately, when they make their strides, they fail to pass the hand backwards. This has been with the LGBT progress. It has been with other ethnicities that have come into our movements, like Operation Black Vote, that was hugely beneficial for the Asian community in terms of accessing institutional resources, and that led into the departments for ethnic disparities, which was hugely successful for Asians, which is why there are Asian business departments in every bank, and a number of other ethnic specific benefits that culturally understand those. Bear with me. This is Hughie calling in. Let's see what he has to say. Afternoon, sir. I'm ready for you. You sign in. I've sent you it on a WhatsApp. So just sign in and I'll let you in the broadcast. Whichever one you like, but you need to sign in from the WhatsApp. Excellent. Speak in a minute. Okay, so candidate Hughie Rose will be on in a second. Apologies for interruptions. We don't have the technical team. So ADPAC is fully behind transformational policy that will specifically affect and raise the attainment levels of and socio-economic mobility of the African Caribbean population. These are things that we explore out with a number of delivery partners, which is why, very importantly, we have this live on LinkedIn so that we can recruit professionals to collaborate, not just in terms of volunteering, but also in terms of, bear with me, I'm just bringing Hughie into the broadcast now. And his device is not connecting. So until he comes in, I'll just continue. So we work with delivery partners, and not only do we have delivery partners who are institutional, but then volunteers, also our independent grassroots and professional delivery partners, where we invite you to draw down on bids with us that will remunerate your organizations. So if you sign up through ADPAC, our website is adpac.net. And as you scroll down, you'll see the schools to industry pipeline for all youth engagement practitioners. Please sign up. This is a national program to raise the attainment of our young men and women and create a seamless pipeline from 3 to 21 that stretches from nursery all the way to university and then industry. It is that seamless pipeline with a number of grassroots, culturally competent delivery partners and also institutional partners to make sure that none of our children get left behind. So rather than the rhetoric of campaigning No Child Left Behind, we create our own pipeline. And this is how we create parity. The most important thing that we can do as a people right now is to get behind our own institutions so that they become just as robust as a Labour Party, as a Conservative Party, but unencumbered by their bylaws, so that we can raise the attainment of our children, protect our children in various forms, including from school bullying. So when we look at organizations like Black Child Agenda and taking positive steps, they would be delivery partners to protect our children from the racism which is just representative of the rest of the nation. It's not only in our employment roles that we realize racism, but just generically the minute that we enter the system. And because racism is irrational and emotional, there is no way that we can actually see it occurring and prevent it until we actually create parity. And that parity can only be created from our own entities. So whether that is our own political parties, our own educational advocacy, our own sustainable schools with our own educational curriculum, that now we look at our own educational trusts. So the question always comes up, why would we set up our own schools if we can only follow their curriculum? Well, this isn't true. And when we look at academies, they can follow any curriculum they like and introduce anything they like. Now, we've understood this for a long time by the secular schools that the Jewish community has had, where their children who are of the Orthodox persuasion are taught within schools on a completely separate curriculum and access resources because they're very organized. So we are looking at a high level of organization at this point that goes across all civic life. So ADPAC represents us in terms of economics, education, employment, health, housing, trade and industry, and media. Politically, our role is to enable organizations like the We Matter Party and to make sure that they are on track with the needs of our community. It's incredibly important that we acknowledge the needs via consultation. Far too much has happened in isolation that doesn't involve us and a deeper understanding of our integral needs as a people. So what traditionally happens is consultants are brought in who cherry pick just like Tony Sewell was brought in to write the Race Disparities Report, where they knew the outcome of what the report. So, welcome our guest, Hughie Rose. And Hughie,
How you
please
doing, sir?
tell us, are you settled in first of all?
Just about.
Okay, good. God bless.
Just about. Is
Glad
the
everybody's relaxing and enjoying their weekend and looking forward to it on a Friday. So, the first thing that I want to ask Hughie is what, coming from a background, let me just give this man his proper introduction. So, Hughie Rose is one of the founding members of Manhood Academy, who is now working in MAG. They have taken young men on rites of passage to Africa to show them the full journey as Africans and exactly what our traditional rites of passage look like when we were on the continent. He's also heavily active in charity that operates in Gambia, and he has some political experience himself and has also been alongside those and met in the US. It's funny, the last time me and Hughie met politically, we were at an event with a lobbyist from the United States who just got in 19 African American women into Congress in Atlanta. So, Hughie Rose, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about your journey, what has brought you to this point, and what made you decide to run.
Okay? Thank you very much for the welcome, Dean. To be honest with you, I've been in the sales industry all my life. I started out probably at the age of 17, selling life insurance and knocking doors for a living, and then bringing up teams, insurance teams, sales teams, and then going to America and working for a large brokerage that dealt with life insurance, pensions, etc. So my background has always been in sales. I've never ever dealt with anything else. I, I've not done a 9 to 5. I've not been in corporate America. So I've always had to deal with our brothers and sisters, wherever they are, whether it's in the continent, whether it's in America, whether it's in England. I currently in the electric and gas business at the moment, again in sales again. So still doing my sales, and obviously being attracted to things I was doing in America and being Afrocentric. I got to meet quite a few people and got to learn about the political circles where I was living, which was Washington, D.C. I used to do some work alongside Marion Barry, Bill Campbell, the mayor of Atlanta, and we helped campaign for a lot of these brothers that put people in prominent positions once they got into power. So coming back to England now, I've always been wanting to go to Africa, and Africa has always been on my agenda. And so I was blessed to go to Africa in 2003, a little place called the Gambia, which is in West Africa. And going from Gambia in West Africa, I thought, boy, I would definitely like to bring some of my friends and some of my colleagues to Africa. So in 2004, I traveled to Africa with a gentleman called Basil. Basil runs quite a few Eat to Eden shops at the moment. He used to do group tours to Gambia, and I came on a couple of tours with him, 2004, 2005. And I then said to him, I think this is something I could do. So I then jumped into doing group trips myself. The first one I did was in 2006, and I carried around 37 people with me on my first ever trip to the motherland. And we had people from the age of 18 all the way up to the age of 80. So from 2006, I've just been embroiled in Pan-Africanism work, politics, sales, land, you name it. I've been involved in it on the motherland from 2006. So it's now my 15th year anniversary. and I've been impressed with the way that things have been going for African people and the opportunities for Africans here and overseas, which brings me to joining the Black-led political party called We Matter. So that's just a little bit about myself, Dean.
Yes, sir. So, what we all really want to hear about your policies, your intentions for the borough and your ward. And we know that your experience has led you to this point. So, being one of the founding members of Manhood Academy, you have an innate understanding of what our young men and women require, having worked with them over a number of years. Tell us a little bit about what you really would like to do in terms of bringing about inclusion and further participation for young people, and specifically African Caribbean young people, where there have been high levels of youth violence between Haringey and Enfield.
Well, definitely. It's great that you brought up that point because at Manhood Academy Global, we've been taking in the young masters from the ages of 13 to 18, and also on a younger scale from 8 to 12. And so our experience and knowledge of the young masters is in depth because we've had to work with them on a weekly basis through our rites of passage program. So one of the things that is dear to my heart is how do we bring out the potential of the young person? How do we bring out the potential of the youth? And so my policy will be to have youth engagement and making sure that there are the youth that can access the resources that are available within Enfield Borough. Now, there are resources there, but many of the time, especially members of the African Caribbean and African community, have not been able to get hold or access those resources. So myself as a councillor coming in, I will be making sure that there's access to those resources so that we can benefit and make sure the youth in the area do benefit from what is going on there. And so it'll be a strategy of also looking at the after school clubs and also making sure that we have access to all of the youth centres and youth clubs that are in the area that are possibly closed right now. So we would want to reopen those ones that have been shut down for 3 or 4 years and start to have some momentum where we can bring our brothers and sisters that are on the streets and have them to do something constructive with their lives.
Excellent. So this is another issue that we look at in terms of the trends that have been happening with councils across the country, and specifically within our communities in terms of closing down resources. I do mention on a regular basis the organisations who have been lobbying effectively and also consulting with government and local authorities. I speak frequently about Access UK and the consultation that Nana has in terms of a parliamentary level, in terms of a Downing Street level, and with City Hall. It's very important that we connect the dots in that these grassroots organisations can coordinate with councillors. But having explored exactly what the policy of benign neglect is, it's pivotal that we vote at this time and we vote in candidates like Hughie, like Gwenton, and like Desmond Jadu, so that they can make these transformational changes that don't exclude us because we're special, but include us because we're ordinary. So another important part of the fabric of Enfield is the elderly population and the fact that they are very much overlooked. And in the time of COVID, them socially gathering is very hard. They have concerns about their health, and there are services that they may not have access to. So very similar in the way that I'm aware that youth services have been closing down on a regular basis. And now that there is all of the deficit in local authorities based on the COVID expenditure, that is going to translate to older people who are even more vulnerable because they may not have their families around them. So what are your plans for the elderly in the borough?
Well, first and foremost, we have to try and secure all of those buildings that have been shut down and shut out. And what I can see based on my evidence within Haringey and Hackney is that there's been a concerted effort by real estate developers to try and push for these elderly centres, these West Indian centres, to be shut down and then redeveloped into high-rise luxurious flats and shared housing. And so we have to make a point that we save these buildings and we make sure that we have something allocated for the elderly of the area. Many a time, all of these buildings have just been given notice, or within a few months, they're shut down and taken back from that council, as you can evidence as what's happened there in Tottenham.
Yeah.
With buildings that you're probably familiar with too. So I'm not just saying this for here, but this is going on London-wide and nationwide.
Yeah.
And so we've got to put a stop to it. And one of the things that we can do is that if we have people that are within the council that are councillors, they have a responsibility, especially if they sit within the planning committee. Because if we have people that are sitting on the planning committee, most of these buildings can be saved. Some of the developers that want to develop on these buildings, that can be blocked if we have a strong presence within the council. There's so much that we can do as a people on a local level. I'm not talking about central level. I'm not talking about MP level. I'm talking about on a local grassroots level, because we hold that balance of power. This is going to be some of the three words that I'll always be mentioning during my campaign. We hold the balance of power. Balance of power. Those are the three main words, key words. And if we vote and if we have our own elected officials, we can control what goes on and what is done and how things are managed. Also, we have the ability to decide who is tendering for certain contracts. I would like to do some research into the business side of Enfield Council to find out how many of the contracts that they have are appropriated to people of colour, especially African people. I want to know from the council of Enfield, what are you doing in regards to the delivery of services? Who's getting those contracts? I don't want to be hearing about they're sitting down with some partner of the big corporation or partner of anybody. No, we should be sufficient enough that we can tender and get a contract and we can deliver that service within Enfield, within Haringey, wherever in London where we are, we should be able to have those contracts. And this is something that many of the councillors that are in position right now, that report has never been done. And we don't have a track record of seeing the success of that being done. So one of the things that I learned from Marion Barry when he was a mayor in Washington, D.C., he had a budget of $4.2 billion to run the city of Washington, D.C. Out of that 4.2 billion, $900 million of that was for contracts that just he could sign off on. So let's say, for instance, if I came to Mayor Barry and I wanted a cleaning contract to clean all of the office buildings within the council, I would go to him, that would be signed off on, they'd give me a tender, I'd have that contract. So what had happened was that, whereas before 90% of the contracts were going to white-owned businesses, when he came into power, that changed to 60-40, where 60% of all contracts was going to black business people. And he created more black millionaires than any mayor in the history of America. And so that's probably one of the reasons why they had to get him out of office.
Absolutely.
But it's just giving you an example of how the power can shift in regards to contracting and tendering in our favor if we're given the opportunity to access those contracts and those tenders.
And of course, it addresses the wealth disparity and the employment disparities and employment wage disparities. So the only way that you can have further participation is through structural inclusion. So it's not that we want to shift the balance in any way that is more ethnically representative than in any borough. However, there were boroughs like Brixton that had Lambeth that had high populations of African Caribbeans and Haringays, and there was no structural inclusion. There was no fair balance of resources being distributed. And we see that now. But this is all around organization and the lack thereof. So my thing is quite clear when anybody says to me, oh, you want special treatment? No, we don't. And we're not blaming anybody else either. We have to look in the mirror and take an honest look and blame ourselves at this stage for our role. And that role, to some degree, has been highly complacent. Well, now that we're organized and we have political parties, we have viable candidates, we have political PACs, and advocating, lobbying, and all of the rest of the organization that recognizes our grassroots organizations and fully brings them into the process as well. So there's a high degree of connectivity amongst people who've worked at the highest echelons of, you name the industries, could be banking, finance, education, and also in terms of civic leadership, in terms of local authorities. Well, now people are leaving on droves to serve specifically our ethnically specific beneficial programs. So we've heard your stance on young people and the elderly, but COVID has brought up a huge disparity in terms of health service for the African Caribbean community. We know that there was a myth that we are more susceptible to COVID-19 because we were heavily hit. But we know that that was an economic argument and the people felt compelled to be on the front lines because their jobs were at risk and people were threatened. So it was no surprise to us that we were more affected. However, when it comes to our needs and requirements in terms of health, they are quite specific. Diabetes is very heavy. Prostate cancer has been quite a big issue for a lot of our brothers, and also sickle cell. So tell us a little bit about your plans to create more access and greater awareness for the local community as well of health services.
Yes, well, you touched something that's dear to me too, sickle cell. If you go around the London boroughs right now, many of the hospitals do not have the equipment to be able to deal with sickle cell sufferers. There's a little thing they have at the nearest hospital to me, Middlesex Park or Middlesex Hospital, but what they have there is not sufficient with the amount of sickle cell sufferers that we have in this country. And so I believe that most of these organizations need to be funded so that they can have that outreach to the community. And also, I think we need to have an awareness drive to find those within our community that need those health services. So health services such as prostate cancer, which is predominantly a disease that afflicts Black men. And so having access to screening, having access to testing. I remember when I went to my doctor and I just said to him, I would like to get a test, um, you know, just to see what my prostate is like. And I was 40 years old. He said, "Oh, no, no, don't worry about it now. Come back in 10 years' time when you're 50." And I was thinking to myself, you know, how many other people are going to doctors and they're being shunned like that? And so
Absolutely.
I actually had to demand it and pressure him that I need to get that done because I want to know what's going on because I've got um, family members, I've got friends, I've got uncles that have had it. And they said that if they'd just caught it a little bit earlier, it would have been better for them. And so we want to create more awareness for prostate cancer. We want to make sure there's access where people can go to their doctors and get seen and tested for prostate cancer. We want men not to be ashamed to having to go out to get that testing done. So we need to have that conversation and more engagement with our Black brothers about this too. And again, you have high blood pressure, which is another concern within the community. Where are the health centres where we can access where these people can get tested? So one of the things I would be wanting to do is make sure that we can have that access. We can get our brothers and sisters out to these places that are on our doorsteps, basically, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't know where they are. And so fundamentally very important health. Another thing is the diabetes. And how do we set up a healthy living program for those that want to change that lifestyle and do a healthy living? Put in some exercise for those who may be suffering with overweight or obesity and have access to the parks, to the leisure centres, things
Yeah.
like this. So I would definitely champion this as a councillor within the Southbury ward.
Well, these are very important topics that you've addressed. I think an important part will be the will of a counsellor. And this is where we talk about cultural competence, because there are things that hit you. We are all human beings and we're only representative of our experiences. So when we say sickle cell to somebody, it has by and large no effect if they aren't African Caribbean. And
Yeah,
you'll see that people who've been affected by um, challenges in their lives and challenges within their families and been hit by tragedies have put policies into practice that will then benefit the masses. So when it comes to sickle cell, if we're precluded by party bylaws from even doing a health audit of local hospitals to see what the needs are, and then collaborating with our grassroots organizations. Now, I can think of three great sickle cell charities off the top of my head to liaise
yeah,
with to actually work and do carry out that audit of hospitals. And what we call it is proof of concept when we do it locally. And then we turn that into a turnkey system and we duplicate that nationally where we know we have the population where it's actually viable, economically viable. And also, those charities, as a councillor, when you endorse them and you go to corporations with their corporate social responsibility programs, they're very happy to sponsor goodwill. The
that's right.
challenges are just knowing that the money is going to go where it is supposed to go. So when you have those, we call them private public partnerships, and it should be no different for us to have these kind of partnerships between our sickle cell charities, local authorities, and then the hospitals, so that that equipment is there and we know our people can be better treated. Now, in London, we are 2 million UK citizens, where we know the vast majority of sickle cell sufferers live. So if we can do that audit just where you are and then start to factor that out, this is how we make transformational difference. And to be fair, this is the only kind of difference in terms of policy that ADPAC is interested in. So this is a very similar conversation that I had with Gwenton on Wednesday. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your ideas around the property sector and planning. because you touched on something that was a fantastic point. You said to catch us before we're sick so that we know that we're well. And I've been speaking with a number of wellness practitioners, and this is an ADPAC program, which is to purchase commercial freeholds to convert into schools, chambers of commerce, community centres, but wellness centres as well. Now, we both know Steve and Sally and the Mary and Dina, and how that builds the immune system and really protects us, which is highly intentional. So a wellness center is very different from a clinic or a hospital that treats the sick and treats the well to maintain optimal health. What are your ideas around something like that and the viability, and in terms of commandeering a property for those practices that go across intergenerational gap and ethnicities as well?
Yeah, I think it would be something different. And I think it would be a fresh of breath air to see something like a wellness clinic in certain parts of my borough. And I would just say that if we've got access to buildings that are not being used, if we've got access to funds from crime proceeds, why can't we marry the two together and produce a building and produce a template as a prototype to put around the whole of London? I just think that we should do something like a pilot project just to see that it can work. And I'm more than happy to say that I'm 99% sure that it must be able to work. And if it works and we can do a pilot project to prove that it works, we need to then throw it out throughout the whole of London and the rest of the boroughs.
Absolutely. Now, you touched on something very important, which is crime. And Enfield has been a borough that has been heavily hit by serious youth violence and murders. And we established that it cost end to end 1.7 million to investigate a murder with Gwenton the other day. So you think it doesn't take long to really rack up the numbers when you get into 2 or 3 murders, not to mention the void of that life in their families. So how willing would you be very quickly to explore the public health approach, which is the connectivity of agencies to stem serious youth violence and really make optimal participation for all of those grassroots organizations, community advocates, and marry that to the institutional sector?
Yeah, very important that we connect the dots. And what we've noticed over the years is that, we got a phrase in the sales industry: if you throw so much thing on the wall, some of it's going to stick.
Absolutely.
And so what's happened with this government? They've thrown so much things on the wall, and you have to figure out what is it they're doing that has brought benefits to that community, or what is it that's actually working. And they don't have a solution for knife crime.
No.
They don't have a solution for gun crime.
No.
They don't have a solution for drug-related offences.
No.
So what they should be doing is looking at the grassroots organisations and creating some public health partnerships with these grassroots organisations that have the know-how to engage with the young people, engage with the people on the grassroots, and see some effective change. One of the things that I would want to introduce, not that I'm favouring it or favouring them, is that when the police come about and really are claiming to doing stop and search procedures, I believe that in every community, the police who are in that community should be the police that reside and live there.
Absolutely.
It should be a strange police coming into my neighborhood, wanting to stop and search me, and doesn't even know me from Adams. I believe that if investment was to go the way, or if the police are going to be listening, or the commissioner of police going to be listening, you allocate police who are going to reside and live in that area for a minimum of 5 years. You see the program work very well in places like Cuba. The doctor, the nurse, the police are all known in that vicinity, and they move on, and you'll know them for many years. You'll move out, they'll still be there. There used to be a policeman that was on the bobby on the beach, should you say, the bobby on the beach in Dalston. I'm not sure if you remember this one. He always had his helmet on, but he trotted the streets for 25 years. He knew everybody, and everybody knew him. And so this is the type of policing that you need. You know, when I used to talk to one of my uncles back in the day, he used to be a policeman in Jamaica. And he said that, you know, Hughie, we don't use that word police officer. We're just a peace officer.
Yes.
So we're just here to keep the peace. That's our. So he said that if I had to arrest you, all I would do, I'll go down, I'll tell you, and if you're not there, I'll just leave a message, tell you he needs to be at the station by 10 o'clock in the morning. That was it. Or if he was there, come walk up, no handcuffs, no nothing, because he knew you.
Yes.
He knew your parents.
Yeah.
They established a rapport.
Yeah.
And so these are some of the things that I would want to introduce into towards the neighborhood police section in order to utilize a crime reducing strategy and then roll it out once it's effective and it's working.
Well, in the last 5 minutes of the show, I'm just going to say to you that you're not alone in that particular policy of ethnically representative policing. Desmond Jeddo, who's running for the police and crime commissioner, is also advocating for the ethnically representative policing of communities so that there's greater cohesion and understanding and an empathy from the officers. And also it goes both ways from the community as well. Brian Rose said very much the same thing when I first met him, that ethnically representative policing in communities was a very important part of his policy. Quentin Slowly said exactly the same thing. So we back those that are interested in delivering and turning transformational policy into practice. This is exactly what we champion. And I myself have a meeting with high-ranking police officers soon to discuss this exact issue. And apparently from inside, there is a will to listen, which is what the invitation is based on. So we are moving in a direction that is becoming more to represent what we actually want to bring about. So in closing, sir, tell us exactly.
I just wanted to add on to that. I've been working at Carnival for the last 20 years, Notting Hill Carnival.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that we try and explain to the high-ranking police is that what happens is that when you bring in thousands of officers that have never, ever interacted with Black people in their life, except once a year when they come Carnival, it's difficult for them to liaise or speak or interact with brothers and sisters at Carnival.
Absolutely.
You need to make sure that the core group of your officers are officers that are from London and that have interaction with Londoners. A lot of the times when we're working at Carnival, you've got police coming up from Hampshire, police coming up from Preston, and police coming from places where they never ever run into Black people.
Absolutely.
And so it's one of the things that we definitely would be advocating, as you know, we Matter Party, we're on the same line of thinking there.
Yeah, and it is number one, it's a very volatile mix when you bring people who have no empathy and have actually been warned via policy that these people may be rambunctious on the day. So it's a policy to bring people down from different areas, exactly the same as they bring down riot police, because they know they have very little empathy. So when they're a little heavy-handed, it's no surprise. When Stephen Lawrence was murdered, I went to the Stephen Lawrence March and got that scar above my eye from a truncheon when I was 18. Now, I wasn't in any kind of criminal activity. Somebody screamed charge, and an officer hit me in the eye with a truncheon. So we know that policy turned into practice is going to affect us, which is why we need to be involved in the political process, which is why I'm asking you today to go out and vote for We Matter candidate Hughie Rose of the We Matter Party in Enfield Southbury ward on the 6th of May. You have a vote, use your vote. We are empowered. We only disempower ourselves. We're past the point of the rhetoric that voting doesn't matter. We are past the point of the rhetoric that it's a wasted vote if you don't vote for a mainstream candidate. Mainstream candidates are cuffed. Even when they look like us, it's only optics, and we need to be aware. Vote for Hughie Rose, vote for the We Matter Party, and everybody have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, Hughie, for coming on the show, and we wish you luck next week on the 6th.
Thank you, and thank you.